The game of the year with Bedlam looming a week away. That's the storyline in Oklahoma this week, where Texas Tech is headed to Norman for a Saturday night showdown with the Sooners. Then with OSU-OU up next in Stillwater. From the Dodge Sports Desk, I'm Mike Sherman, and this is Bedlam Nation Conversation, sponsored by Dodge. With me today, OU beat writer Jake Trotter and OSU beat writer Scott Wright. Guys, Texas Tech handled the Cowboys 2 weeks ago in Lubbock, 56-20. It was a big game. But this Tech team, this Tech franchise under Mike Leach, if you will, is 0-4 in Norman, and the Sooners have really handled them. Based on what you've witnessed, Scott, and based on what you've learned, Jake, what can you tell me at all about why this game Saturday may or may not be different? Scott, you go first.
Well, I think that it has a pretty good chance of going the way that a lot of these have gone, because Oklahoma has always played so well in this game when it's in Norman. I think one big thing for Oklahoma is going to be making tackles. We saw that against Oklahoma State, that if you miss that first opportunity at a tackle, Texas Tech can find a way to hurt you, whether it's in the run game or the passing game. That Texas Tech run game is something that can't be overlooked. It's actually worth talking about. In the past, that hasn't always been the case.
Jake, rate the Sooners tackling this year.
Wow, 7 maybe? Is that, I don't know. Yeah, 7.
So do you think this game is going to be any different than past OU Tech games?
I think it could be. I think it could be the same. One thing that's interesting to think about is this will be the first time in a while that a Tech quarterback will have already had the experience of playing in Norman. Graham Harrell played here 2 years ago and played fairly well. It was a 34-24 game that was pretty close until the fourth quarter. So he has that experience, and it's basically the same team they've had last year. They're not going to get rattled. They're a veteran team. So I think that's going for Tech. But Oklahoma's been dominant at Owen Field over the years, especially against Tech. So it's a chance for this defense to really make a statement that they haven't really done this year. So it could go either way. But I think obviously Tech having an experienced team is going to bode well for them.
The pass rush when OSU faced Tech was really not the factor that the Cowboys needed it to be. And Jake, you've outlined in previous videos and stories that the Sooners have some challenges rushing the passer, basically based on all the injuries they've had at defensive end. What's the latest on that?
Well, at full strength, they might be the best pass rushing team in the Big 12. They lead the Big 12 in sacks. They obviously have a couple big injuries, one to Austin English, another to Allen Davis. So it's going to be on Frank Alexander and Jeremy Beal, very talented but very young players, although Beal is a little more of a veteran, having played a little bit last year and all of this year. But after that, Bryce Macon and J.R. Bryant, I don't know how much they can rely on those guys. You're essentially relying on an outside linebacker and a defensive tackle, and I don't know that those guys are going to be able to put all that much pressure on Harrell. You don't have to sack Harrell every time, and I think that's going to be very difficult to do, but you can't let him sit back there and go through his 5-step progression, 5-read progression, which is what he did against Oklahoma State. That really hurt the Cowboys.
If you look at the OSU-Missouri game, in a similar offense, one of the things the Cowboys did was they flushed Chase Daniel out of the pocket. And that was a big thing, and you didn't see that at all, really, from OSU at Tech. Jake touched on the relative health of the Sooners. The Cowboys have an open week, and it's time to do some healing, some recruiting, but what's the healing concerns as far as the Cowboys are?
Obviously, Kendall Hunter is the one guy that you have to be a little bit concerned about, because the whole injury is kind of shrouded exactly as to what it is. So from the sound of everything, it doesn't seem that it's anything that's going to be serious. I would expect he probably has taken this week off, and we'll get the weekend to rest up, and then he'll be back out there on the practice field on Monday when they get back at it. So I don't think that that's anything that anybody needs to worry about. As to whether or not it's a quad bruise, I don't know the answer to that at this point, and I don't think anybody does, except for probably Kendall Hunter and Mike Gundy and the training staff. But other than that, they had a few guys, Tonga Tea, Brandon Pettigrew, Keith Toston, guys who missed a little bit of time at Colorado. It was really the worst game they've had in terms of in-game injuries, but everybody seemed to come back other than Hunter, and I don't think they're going to have any issues. The bye week comes at a great time, though.
You're watching the Bedlam Nation Conversation, sponsored by Dodge. Guys, yesterday Bob Stoops made fans a big storyline this week in the OU Tech game, which also could really play in some ways to the OU-OSU game a week from now. But he more or less said, hey, we built this great home winning streak largely on what we've done on the field, and not so much with help from the fans. Jake, what did you were there when he said it?
Well, it's obviously a calculated move on his part to get the stadium as loud as it can be on Saturday night. He took it pretty far, too. I mean, he basically said, our fans aren't very loud. He didn't say, we need your help, or, we're going to need you to be louder than you've been. He basically called them out for not being a big factor in these home games, which obviously is not the case. Although I do think that in some of the games where they've been over in the first quarter, the crowd obviously is not going to be, hasn't been as into it as you would have liked. But I think Missouri last year, the crowd was a factor. And, some of the Bedlam games over the years certainly too. So I think the crowd will be ready to go Saturday night, and they have extra motivation to prove that they have a big home field advantage with a loud crowd in Norman.
Scott, has the OSU crowd been a factor in any games this year?
I think it's been more of a factor this year than it was before this because of the structure of the stadium. It holds the noise in better. Obviously they only got up over that 50,000 mark a couple of times. Haven't got really close to selling that thing out yet, and won't this season, obviously, because of the Bedlam ticket policy. So we'll see what kind of a factor it's able to be whenever Oklahoma comes up there. Obviously, they'll the 45,000 that are there are going to be loud, but it hasn't gotten as loud as it possibly could. And obviously, having covered Oklahoma for a couple of years, I don't think that Stoops is completely off base with this. I think that the crowd tries to be loud, but they can't compare with a place like Texas A&M. Being down on the field there 2 years ago when Oklahoma was playing there, you couldn't talk to the person next to you. It was so loud in that 17-16 game. There are some places in the Big 12 that get really loud, and I don't know that Oklahoma is one of them.
OSU has improved its acoustics. It's not Gallagher-Iba Arena, but it is louder. Do you guys, what do you attribute this, sort of tame or not, let's call it not loud OU crowd to? Is it architecture, or is it sort of the culture of the fan at OU?
Well, maybe that's part of it. When's the last time OU had a big game in Norman, too? I mean, Missouri, and then after that, they just played a lot of bad teams there over the years. I think Miami last year was a little bit loud, but it was over at halftime. So I think if OU would get in more situations where there was some doubt at the end of the game, I think you would see the crowd step up. But Chattanooga, you can't really fault the crowd for mailing it in after the first quarter.
If you go back to 2003, the Sooners are playing the Oklahoma State Cowboys in a big game. Les Miles has baited the hook by saying one team is really good and the other one's the best team in the country. We're going to find out which is which. And then in the third quarter, the Sooners go down there, and there is a goal line stand OSU at the goal line, and that was a time when the crowd really took over in Norman. And you might have to go back that far to realize when the crowd played as big a factor in
I think if Texas came to Norman every other year, you would have a different argument here.
It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Guys, let's change gears to recruiting. It's a good time to talk recruiting for OSU because they're off this week, and there's never a bad time to talk about OU recruiting as far as the fans are concerned. Scott, you start. What's the latest on OSU recruiting?
Well, the Cowboys have picked up their 10th commitment, a safety, really kind of an athlete from Katy, Texas, Joe Mitchell, a kid that was really kind of under the radar at this point. But 6'3", 215, he's got a good body and runs pretty well. He played quarterback and defensive back for his high school team. They're looking at him as kind of a safety. With that size, he could be a guy that moves up into that the star linebacker position, that hybrid position that Andre Sexton plays right now. I think that he's a guy that we'll see. Safety is a position where they're going to need some people, and linebacker too within the next couple of years because they've got so much experience there. But at this point, still another 14 spots to fill, according to Mike Gundy. He says they're going to sign 24 in this class, which it's a little tough doing the math right now because they only have 11 scholarship seniors at this point. But that's what he says they're shooting for. A quarterback is still a big need. Both lines, they've got needs in quite a few different places. Other than probably running back and receiver, they're pretty well set at those positions.
Jake, catch us up on the Sooners and the latest on them.
OSU needs a quarterback for sure. Mm-hmm. That offense really needs a guy who can, I think, run a little bit, right? Yeah. With OU, the biggest news is they already have 19 commitments. They're almost done with this class. Jamarcus Sparlin, who's a 5-star defensive tackle out of Lufkin, he's a guy that's narrowed down his choice between Oklahoma and Texas. Who knows when a decision will come, but that's the latest news with OU recruiting, and a guy that they'd really love to have. He would come in and whenever McCoy and Granger and Corey Bennett is obviously a senior, when those guys go, he's the next he could be the next in that long line of great defensive tackles that they've had.
Okay, guys. Finally, let's talk about Bedlam is dead ahead, and we're the 20-year anniversary of the 1988 Bedlam game. The game remembered for Brent Parker's drop, for Barry Sanders' Heisman Trophy sort of a punctuation performance, for Mike Gaddis, and who almost outdueled Barry Sanders that day. And it just so happens that as young lads, each of you were at the game. Jake, what do you remember seeing that day in Stillwater?
I was only 7 years old, but I have a lot of sort of memories of plays that happened. I remember Mike Gaddis's, like a 30-yard run right up the middle where he was untouched on just a dive or something. Barry Sanders' run along the sidelines later on in the game. I remember OU fumbling, it seemed like 9 times in a row on the game-winning drive. Recovered all of them, and then Jamel Holloway scored on an option run on the next play. And then obviously the last drive I have memories of. I remember the Garrett Limbrick play, but I remember not really understanding what had happened. Just that for whatever reason, it was 4th and 16, and then you could hear the ball bounce off Brent Parker's chest in the end zone that game. So it was a really entertaining game. Probably, I think, the best Bedlam game of all time, just in terms of star power, where the teams were ranked, and how the game finished.
And drama, and you can be forgiven as a 7-year-old for forgetting that was Charles Thompson that scored on that play.
Yeah.
Scott Wright, what do you remember?
Well, you know what? The one thing that always stuck with me about that, two things. One, that as a 10-year-old, that was my first trip to what was then Lewis Field, and that place was loud that day. Maybe it was my my youth that has made that. I've built that up in time since then. But I remember it being really loud that day, and my uncle got us tickets that were right next to the OSU student section, so it was crazy in that stadium that day. And the other thing was actually witnessing a guy in person that went on to win the Heisman Trophy. That was something that I had kind of understood what the Heisman Trophy was and how big a deal it was. But after seeing him and then realizing that this guy won the trophy and was college football's best player, and then watching his career throughout the NFL, that moment has always stuck with me about how big a deal that was.
He really had a Heisman game.
Yeah, he did.
As good as OU's defense was, they really couldn't stop Barry Sanders that game. And Jamel Holloway was hurt, I guess, early on in the year heading into that game. Okay.
It's interesting though, Jake, as you point out, OU did fumble at least 2 times, and maybe
I think it was 3 straight
3 times.
plays.
Yeah, one was a center exchange. One was Mike Gaddis fumbling the ball and picking it and recovering his own fumble.
One time somebody kicked it, and OU ended up with it. There was like no way OU recovered it, but they ended up with it, and that was kind of a Sooner magic, right?
And that's what Switzer called it after the game. Listen, you'll be able to see these guys and other members of our staff sort of relive their memories of the 1988 Bedlam game on the 20th anniversary next week on newsok.com. There's going to be the Bedlam Extra coming up next Friday in the Oklahoman. And oh yeah, there is the small matter of OU Texas Tech, 7 o'clock Saturday night on ABC, the big game. Listen, to continue the conversation about all things Bedlam, go to bedlamnation.com and stay tuned to the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the New Look Oklahoma.